I've been working on my comic for 13 hours a week, every week for more than 18 months, and after spending over 1,000 hours on it, I'm restarting the whole thing. And by the end of this video, you're going to be able to answer the question, should I start my comic again? And you'll have a clear roadmap so that if you do decide that you're going to start again, you won't be doomed to repeat the same comic over and over and over again and never finish it. So let's get on to step one. So step one is define your why. If you can't explain exactly why you're planning to restart your comic, then you're going to be trapped in the cycle of constantly doing that and you'll never actually finish a single one. Probably the most common reason why people want to restart their comic is because they feel that they can do a better job, especially when it comes to the art. Now, this is a trap because of the way that we develop as artists and creators. So let me show you what I mean. So if you've been working on your comic like me for 18 months or just a long period of time, and you feel that your skills have got so much better that your first few pages look like garbage, and so you want to start again using your new skills, guess what's going to happen in 18 months time? You're going to get even better, start over again, and get even better, start over again, and get even better, start over again. You're a hamster stuck in your wheel. That's why if that's your why for restarting your comic, then you shouldn't do it. Just see it through to the end and allow your art skills to develop with you. So if that's a bad reason for restarting, then what's a good one? Well, allow me to explain my reason for restarting my comic, because restarting a comic after spending 13 hours a week over 18 months is not an easy decision to make. So it's really important to spot the signs that maybe restarting is the answer to your issues, and this is what happened to me. First, I was finding it more difficult to complete the pages that I was working on. Now, the pages themselves weren't more difficult than usual, I was just finding it less and less enjoyable to actually work on the comic. Now, I know what self-doubt feels like, and I know what the early stages of burnout look like. So I took a bit of time, rested for a day, and then came back to it feeling much more recharged. But the feeling didn't go, so I tried a new approach. Because at that point, I'd completed 96 pages of the comic, I had a lot of data that I could look at. It wasn't the drawings that made me feel like I wasn't really enjoying it, and it wasn't a mental block either. I felt really good, actually. So it must have been something else. So what I did was I exported all 96 pages and put them in a single PDF so that I could read them as a comic, and that's when it hit me. It was the story, not the art. When I read the comic and I thought to myself, what is this comic about? I couldn't really answer it. And that's a problem. If you don't know what your story is about, or you can't concisely explain what your story is about, nobody else will know either. If you don't know what the main theme of your story is, then you're just going to get lost in it. And that's exactly what happened to me. Likewise, if you don't know what your character's motivations really are, then they're going to end up being inconsistent, or perhaps worse, unconvincing. My story hit all of those points, or at least didn't hit any of those points. Now, I knew what I wanted the story to be about. I knew what I wanted the theme to be about. I knew what I wanted my character's motivations to be, but I didn't really recognize any of that while I was reading the comic, especially those early pages. My plot and comic were built on sand, and it was sinking. So I was faced with a choice. Do I push through the final 30 pages, then go back to the start and color it, because I hadn't colored it at that point? Or do I restart it and build it on sturdier ground? Now, if I did decide to restart it, then that's at least another 18 months of working on a comic that I didn't really believe in. So after reflection, the choice, although it wasn't easy, it was clear. And this is why you need to define your reason why. Because if you ever restart your comic without really knowing why you're restarting your comic, you're almost certainly going to regret it. Now, I technically wasted 18 months, but I don't really consider it a waste of time. Yes, it's frustrating that I'm going to have to wait even longer before I have a finished comic, but at least I'll have a comic that I understand and that I can put my name to, and I can want other people to read and feel confident that there is an audience for it. I'm a big believer that there's an audience for basically any type of comic, but I also believe that there's no audience for a comic that doesn't make sense narratively. And that's exactly what my comic was. That's why I restarted my comic. So let's move on to step 2. So let's say that you've decided that you're going to restart your comic, or at least audit your comic. How do you ensure that you don't end up here again? Well, your first goal as a comic creator is to build a strong foundation for your comic to sit on. You need to establish what your comic's theme is. This is the central idea or message that runs through your entire comic, and this is the thing that you're going to use to pitch your comic, whether that's to a publisher or to your audience. It's the answer to the question of what is your comic about? Your answer should be the theme. Now, if you're sitting there without even an idea for your comic, then finding a theme can be quite difficult. So don't worry too much if you can't think of one instantly. The way that I figured out my theme was to figure out the plot first. Some will argue that you should do it the other way around, find a theme first and then build the plot around that, which is totally fine. This is just how I made it make sense for me. Also, this isn't a linear process. Like, you will define some of the plot and then you'll define some of the theme and then go back to plot, back to theme, back and forth all the time. Now, for me to find sort of a structure, which I desperately needed, I used the Save the Cat storytelling technique, which consists of 15 story beats. The reason I was really drawn to this technique is because I found the 3-act structure to be too vague. There was too much of the story to deal with an entire act each time. So having these 15 beats broke it down into 15 bite-sized chunks, and I could manage that mentally a lot more. And if you're interested in following along with my journey, I'm documenting it in detail over on my Patreon, so click the link in the description. Anyway, one of the beats, and probably the most important beat, is the theme stated beat. This is often stated by a character within the first sort of 10% of the story, give or take. It doesn't have to be the main character, it can be a side character. And in fact, most often it is a side character. And here are some examples of themes stated. With great power comes great responsibility. You either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain. Both of these are said by side characters in Spider-Man and Batman respectively, but they state the theme of the stories. A really useful way to figure out what your theme is to think about your main character. They're the main character because they're the ones that everything is happening to, or most of the things are happening to. So what do they start believing at the beginning of the book, and what do they end up believing by the end of the book? You could write something down like, my character thought blank, but realized blank because blank. And you can then extract a theme from that. So maybe your character thought they knew everything, but realized they know nothing because they go on a new adventure. The theme could be that true growth only really happens when you open yourself up to the world and explore something new. Another thing to make sure of is to not accidentally drop your theme halfway through your comic. And to help make sure that doesn't happen, you can map your theme onto your character's arc. So we know at the start that they're closed-minded. We know by the midpoint that they're going to start questioning themselves and their belief system. Maybe they resist the challenges that are thrown at them that question their belief system or something, I don't know. But by the end of it, they know that they accept that perhaps they were wrong. And you can even divide that arc into Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. So your job as a storyteller is to throw obstacles at your hero to challenge their belief system. Have your character resist that to help create conflict, and then resolve it at the end through acceptance. That is storytelling 101, and it's the spine of your story. And doing this puts you in a hugely advantageous position as a comic creator because you know what your comic is about. The core idea is there and it's preserved, which not only means that you'll have a coherent story that actually makes sense, but you'll be able to sell that story to others, whether that's a publisher or your audience. If you have to write an essay to explain your story, it's not a coherent story. But if you can say something like, my story is about the impact of exploring new worlds on closed-minded people, that's an interesting story that people can immediately understand. Wow. Then you can put dragons in there and superpowers and monsters to make it spicy. But the core ingredients are there. Oftentimes we start with the monsters and the dragons and the superpowers and then think, okay, let's just make a story about those things. But those things aren't interesting. Those things are added ingredients. They are the icing on the cake, but you need a cake first. That's what the plot is, that's what the narrative is, that's what the, for me, Save the Cat technique was. Let's move on to step 3. If you've gone through step 1 and step 2, you're faced with 2 choices. Either tweak your story or start over again. My daughter is awake. Good God. I chose to start over, but no matter which choice you face, the 3rd step remains the same. Take your time. There is no point rushing ahead only to find yourself in the position that I found myself in, so it's important to take your time. But that's kind of ambiguous, right? What does that look like in practice? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to show you. I've sectioned out each phase of the comic into 4 main sections and certain subsections as well. Now, this is not exhaustive, it's mostly illustrative to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Now, when you get to each section or subsection, you need to ask yourself this question. What is the minimum amount I need to do to achieve what I need from this section? So when you're in the plot writing stage, you need to ensure that your theme runs through and that you have a beginning, middle, and end. When you're writing your character arcs, you need to ensure that they have transformed from where they were at the beginning to where they are at the end. When you're designing your characters, you need to ensure what sort of shape language you're using, and you need to define their silhouettes so that they're really easy to read from a distance. Knowing these sorts of things ahead of time, knowing what your goals are for each section, gives you a clear roadmap of what you need to do. And it stops you from just drawing or writing for the sake of it, not knowing whether you're done or not. You're done when you have what you need. Now, if it takes you 6 months of pre-production and planning to get your comic ready, that is 100% worth it if you do it right. Because if you set everything up right at the beginning, then it'll make the process of actually making the comic so much easier, faster, and way more enjoyable. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have everything perfect before you start, because you can always pause and plan as you go. But it does mean that you have a clear direction that you're heading in and you're not going through uncharted waters. That's the whole point of setting everything up properly. Now, I know that there will be some of you thinking that you don't want to plan, or you don't want to plan for very long because you feel it's kind of a waste of time. Making comics is slow, painful, and difficult, and you want to be able to share your work with other people as quickly as possible. And you can't really do that with all that planning stuff, right? Wrong. Most of the stuff that you're creating in the planning phase can be used to sell your comic later on. You can offer behind-the-scenes character designs or a copy of the script as bonuses if people are interested. You can create like a deluxe edition of your comic with all that added extra stuff. Or you can use them as marketing material to promote your comic in the first place. So nothing is wasted and nothing is pointless. Planning doesn't just help you make your comic, it can help you sell it. Just trust the process that taking your time in the beginning will pay off in the long run. Think of it as an investment in your comic. You'll get a lot more out of it if you slow down at the beginning. Plus, it will dramatically increase your chances of actually finishing it. I, unbeknownst to me, didn't do this with the writing. I focused so much on the art and the processes of the art because I'm primarily an artist that I neglected the writing, and it cost me 18 months of work. So take it from me, it's worth slowing down and properly planning. Which brings me onto the burning question. Should you restart your comic? Well, only you can really answer that. If you're 90% finished, you might as well finish it and then apply what you've watched in this video to your next comic. The lesson that I've learned in my 18 months working on my comic is to ensure that the spine of the comic is understood before any art is applied. Had I done that properly, I wouldn't be where I am now. Ultimately, you should do what's best for you as a creative, both for your comic and your mental health. There's a lot of advice out there online, and I try to add to it in a positive way, but even with the best of intentions, some advice can cause more harm than good. So if you want to know how to apply art advice or comic advice or any advice, I guess, including everything that I've said in this video and all of my videos, then watch this video next. And don't forget to check out the link in the description to see what I've been talking about in this video in action.